addition project, there are stormwater requirements, and we're dealing with two different watersheds here on this particular project, so that complicates it a little more, although I'm really pleased the relationship that the county has, that we have with the watershed districts, and the opportunity to work with them on some water quality improvements here and some stormwater management. In addition, you're well aware of the access issues near Menards and Wendy's, and I think we have a real opportunity there to work with them as local businesses to improve that access, and more importantly, I think just make sure that we provide a safe route to the retail, commercial outlets and residential areas along this road as well. And then certainly the intersection at 19th Street, balancing the needs of the city of Forest Lake and the property owners within that area to make sure that we address those issues at 19th as well. We've got a top-notch staff with Washington County as well, and Morgan Abbott is really leading this project. I know you've had a chance to visit with her virtually in the past. She's excited to be here tonight to visit with you in person on that, and she is just a very, very sharp engineer. I think we've got one of our best on this particular project, and so I'd like to turn it over to her, and she can go through the details, and then hopefully we can get some input from the council. And as Ryan indicated, we are looking for a resolution of support that we're hoping to obtain from you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, thanks. I'm sorry? To get to my PowerPoint that I sent in?
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
That was the handoff to technical assistance.
Yeah.
Are you the son? Is it
That's
here?
me. Dan, you might want to unplug. I had the HDMI. I don't know if you need to unplug that one.
Oh,
So,
you're good.
okay.
The most I've worked on this one.
Okay. Can you guys see it on your?
This one's not gonna.
Oh, okay. You got to connect it.
Just
Let me unplug it. Oh, made a noise. Yes.
We did test this. It was working. I can run the slides from mine.
Yeah, that's fine. I got them right here. I got them paped out, so you're fine.
But I'll run it from mine.
I know.
County State Highway.
No matter if you're virtual or in person, you're gonna have IT issues, no matter what. It's
So I
just,
pretend I don't know
it's
anything
just different
about.
ones. Yeah. It's fine. There we go. All right. There we go. Okay, I think we're rolling. All right, thank you, Commissioner Miron, Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you for welcoming the county back in person this time. My name is Morgan Abbott, and I'm the Washington County Project Manager for the CASA 33, or County State Aid Highway, or Everton Avenue. So tonight I'm going to walk you through our process, which includes project overview, public engagement, preferred alternative, analysis, construction costs, next steps, and then I'll open it up for discussions and questions. So the next slide, so we're on the third slide. Sorry, I'll tell you when so one more up.
This one?
Nope, sorry, the third one. There we go. So a quick history of the area. Everton Avenue was a city street until 2013, where the city and the county did a jurisdictional transfer or swap of roads. At that time, the county took over Everton, and the city, in exchange, took over North Shore Trail and 11th Avenue on the east side of the city. So the Everton Avenue was built for up to city standards. So now with this project, we're going to build it and reconstruct it so it's up to county highway standards. So that's just a little thicker pavement. It can handle truck traffic, things like that with pedestrian accommodations. So on this image here, Everton Avenue is seen with a solid green line. That area will be fully constructed. You'll see Broadway Avenue on the north side. That's with the green dotted line. That's going to have some pavement maintenance done to it during this project to prolong the pavement that's out there. So we were here at previous workshops in June of 2020 and then again of January in 2021. The construction schedule has updated a little bit with COVID. It was 2023 originally when we first came here, and now it's got bumped to 2024. So the next slide, please. So the first thing we did is look at existing conditions. So we as a county got together and looked at what's out there today. We met with the city stakeholders and we identified what are the issues out there. Those include poor pavement condition, operational concerns, storm sewer updates needed. In mixed corridor, there's some areas of the corridor that are what's called rural with a earthen ditch, and some that are urban with a curb and gutter system. Next slide. And then finally, we identified the lack of pedestrian accommodations. The picture on the right was an aerial that we took May of 2020. You can see the pedestrians walking down the shoulder of the road, and then the picture on the left is along Broadway, where we're planning on putting a connection in between 19th and Everton. Next slide. Then we went through and we identified our goals. What is the goals of the project? So we identified those as improve safety and operations, provide bicycle, pedestrian, and ADA facility improvements, maintain and improve local access, maintain long-term transportation goals with the county and the city. Next slide, please.
Can you confirm that that's not the typical section?
Oh yeah, no, that's just an example of one of the alternatives that we looked at. That's not what the preferred alternative is. So I'll explain that later in my presentation. So project overview, who is the project management team that looked at this? So it's the City of Forest Lake, Washington County. We have our design consultant here tonight. We have 2 watersheds, as Commissioner Murin indicated. We have Comfort Lake, Forest Lake, and Rice Creek watershed. And this group met monthly to develop this preferred alternative. We created project goals, project website, community engagement plan, and then we reviewed and commented on design alternatives. Next slide. We did do 2 public engagement events, one in June of 2020 and the second one in February of 2021. They were both online formats. The first one we had 361 recorded views and the second one had 684. Both of them had a video storyboard that walked them through the project and what the ask was of the community. And then they had a map that they could go into and comment on, and then there was also a structured survey that they could answer questions. So how we advertised is we did social media pushes, we did press releases, and we mailed notices to the adjacent property owners, and that included approximately 450 mailings. Next slide, please. So public engagement, what we heard from the first one, so the first one was just open listen, blank slate. The top 3 comments we heard back from the community is lack of pedestrian bicycle facilities. There was a couple traffic operational and safety concerns, including the commercial driveways on the north end and then the intersection at 19th. Next slide. The second engagement was, we had some alternatives that we wanted feedback on, and that was our second time that we came in, and this is a second workshop with the city. We looked at 2 options with the existing center line, which included keeping it where it is today and then shifting it a couple feet to the east. And that was due to we wanted to see if we could reduce impacts to wetlands along the corridor. On the west side, there's a lot of existing wetlands, and so what we discovered if we did that shift, that there's a lot of challenges with proximity to existing businesses, and there's also some wetlands on the east side. So our initial assumption that we'd be able to reduce impact to wetlands was reduced because we were impacting some on the east side as well. Other things we looked at was trail crossing locations and then the trail connection along Broadway. Next slide. So specific engagement with the adjacent businesses. So county staff, like I said before, I sent out letters to all adjacent landowners, not just for the public engagement events, but we also sent out just information about the project. On October 7th, county staff did go door knocking with all the adjacent businesses and have face-to-face to make sure that they're aware of the project. Next slide, please. So with all that, we came up with a preferred alternative of a 3-lane urban design. This is an example of what the end product would look like. This is in Washington County. It's another county road, so we have built this type of facility before. We're proposing to put a trail on one side of Everton. Usually we look at putting it on both sides, but with the narrow corridor, that's too impactful and we couldn't get it to fit without hardship. And then turn lanes to accommodate operations, and then looking at access management. So go ahead, next slide, please. So getting into construction costs, the county does have a cost participation policy. So what does that mean? So Washington County covers core roadway element costs. So that's grading, base, pavement, signing, striping, culverts, etc. We do have a cost share with local agencies with highway enhancements. So that includes trails, sidewalk, traffic signals, curb and gutter, retaining walls, etc. And then the city utility costs are 100% on the city. Next slide, please. So right now, our high-level construction cost is coming in approximately at $4.3 million. 90% of that is county costs at $3.9 million, and then the city of Forest Lake, we're at $370,000 right now. This is really high level. This is just construction. This does not include any city utility improvements, right-of-way, engineering design, or construction administration or inspection. This is just raw getting out there, moving pavement. Next slide, please. So where are we at? So we kicked off this project spring of 2020, and we've been in the preliminary design for about 18 months. Now we're at the first transition point where we're coming and seeking resolution of support from the city. Then if we get that, then we move into final design and right away. So then we'll start doing our assessments of property impacts and getting a cost around that. And then we're moving into final design. So we're going to dive a little deeper into our proposed design to see, do little tiny tweaks, but what we're showing you today is what we're intending to build. So that's about a 2-year process. And then we'll come back to the city and get for cooperative agreements. So there's the construction cooperative agreement, cost share, but then there's also the maintenance agreement that will come and we'll talk to you about. And then we'll move into construction, and we're anticipating this will just be one construction year, with wrapping it up fall of 2024. So next slide, please. So resolution of support. So with the city of Forest Lakes resolution of support, like I said, Washington County will move out of the alternative analysis phase and into final design phase. Next slide. And then with that, I'm going to move into what we're actually proposing. So I have a layout in front of you. Otherwise, I believe we do have a PDF that I can throw up and zoom in and out of maybe. I don't know if this is
that might be helpful to have something on screen. Oh, actually, you've got it.
Yep. So I do have with me Steve Werser from Alliant Engineering, and then Joe Gustafson is a county traffic engineer here to help answer questions. So I don't know the best, Ryan, you know the best way we should walk through. So I don't have capability of zooming in because he has control.
You zoom in or not, Dan?
So, okay.
Yep, I can.
Okay, so we're on we can start here. So we're on the south end of the project. So in your handout, it's kind of a little bit out of order, but we're gonna start the first page. We start right at that curve, right by the pond, south of the driveway that goes into the MnDOT rest area. And we're gonna work our way north. So this area, we're just putting in the trail on the east side. We're not touching the pavement minus a little bit of improvements to that driveway and the shoulder. Just to get that trail in there. And as we move north, you'll see where the pavement changes color, where it gets dark. That's where we're starting the reconstruct of the road. So here we're showing, I believe, a 10-foot boulevard of green space and then an 8-foot trail. And then as we move north, we match in.
Can we do questions on this section before you move north? Otherwise, we'll spend all night toggling between views. I think we'd had some discussion around location of pedestrian facility, and did you decide it's further north from this point, or is there a planned pedestrian facility at this section?
Yep, so it's further north than this. So as we move forward north, I'll point it out to you.
And I mean crosswalk. I'm not being clear. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So here it's on the east side, and it stays on the east side until we get into that curved area north of here.
Okay.
Yeah, I have that too.
So you guys got the big handout at the back, it has the 11 by 17 sheets. You could see much better than probably the screen. You can actually see the numbers on that one.
So we're on, I don't have it, so I'm gonna look over your shoulder. So we're on the second page. So you can see at the top of the page is where we're rounding that bend, working north on Everton, and then on the bottom half of the page is where we're getting to the driveway into that MnDOT facility. So if you move to is there any questions on this page before we move forward? Okay, so if you turn the next page over.
Just one comment too. So why the pedestrian facilities on this side is that we're turning that sharp corner. Remember how wide that intersection gets? And really we're taking pedestrians to nowhere. But as you turn that corner and stay on the south side of County State Aid Highway 32 or 11th Avenue, that's where the bridge deck's wide enough to accommodate pedestrian improvements that would continue into that project.
And there isn't get my directions mixed up. There aren't pedestrian facilities on 11th on the other side,
Correct.
going to the west, right? There's nothing there, right? Is that right?
Going
Is
to,
it a wider shoulder, but no pedestrian, there's no sidewalk?
so you're talking about the east-west, so County Road 32. Are you talking about going over the interstate or going towards Anoka County?
Going towards Anoka County, because I mean, I'm thinking in particular, the neighborhood that has access to 11th, that stretch sometimes has some pedestrian traffic, but I think that's unsupported today. Is that right, Ryan?
We take curb and gutter up to them, and then that's it. Then right after that, it goes to a rural road with no shoulders in Columbus
Right.
there.
And so that pedestrian traffic at that intersection, would they be crossing there?
Correct, yes.
And is there a crosswalk?
Currently there?
So that development has sidewalk internally, but comes up to 19th area.
Okay.
It does not have sidewalk down Elston Avenue out to 220th or 11th Avenue or
That's-
County Stated
yes,
Highway
that's okay.
32.
So the recommended path for them would be to come out onto 19th to get onto
Correct.
Everton, okay.
And I just want to, so that direction on that road, that's city road, so we didn't look at that
I
for this
understand.
project.
And
Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure we're not making things worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you go to sheet 2, you'll see where the pedestrian is crossing then, south of 19th. So with this one, at the bottom of the page, you can see the intersection. So what we looked at is the distance the pedestrian would have to cross and how many lanes at one time the pedestrian would have to cross. We're not proposing to change the traffic control at 19th. So vehicles on Everton Avenue are not stopping at this intersection. So we're looking at a 4-lane and a 6-inch shoulder for that pedestrian to cross if we were to have them cross at the intersection, versus mid-block crossing. They have a refuge in the middle of the road, so they only have to worry about crossing 1 lane at a time. And Joe Gustafson, who's in the room, he's really good at making sure that that width is wide enough to accommodate bikes with trailers. So if you're pulling your kid on the bike, there's adequate refuge.
Can you zoom out just a bit? Trying to get a broader context of.
Did this change at all from the January presentation, the location?
So
It seems like it's a little more north potentially. Was it further south?
Do you remember if we might have modified it a little bit once we
Okay.
looked at the ditch line and the water? It might have moved a little bit, but it's generally in the same place that we proposed back in
Okay.
January.
I know we had a lot of discussion about
Mhm.
safety concerns. It's not an intuitive stopping point for people driving along that road like an intersection is.
Mhm.
So it's still a little concerning to me.
So I know, Joe, if you want to come up, I know he's got some really good. Joe takes pedestrian safety very seriously, and he can speak to that a
Okay.
lot better than I can. So I'll ask Joe to come up and walk you through it.
Welcome, glad you're here.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. As Morgan said, this is something we take very seriously, and looking at the types of crashes that we have, not just within Washington County, but the Twin Cities as a whole, it's certainly true that a mid-block location might not seem like the logical stopping point, but unfortunately at a two-way stop, the intersection isn't really a logical stopping point for people either. And when they see another vehicle slowing down in a turn lane, for example, they have a tendency to assume that that person is slowing down because they're turning or they're waiting for a gap to make their left turn, and not realizing that there might be a pedestrian in front of that vehicle. And that's one of the big advantages of moving to a mid-block location, is it takes away those other reasons that people might be stopping, and it improves that visibility for the first car by taking away those other turn lanes that might be shadowing and hiding pedestrians from view. That and just the overall convenience to the pedestrian of being able to make those 2 short crossings instead of the 1 long one and really empowers the pedestrian to choose that gap. And because you can get from one curb to the other within about 4 or 5 seconds, there's lots of 4 and 5 second gaps in traffic. So it really empowers the pedestrian to be able to cross and not have to put their safety in the hands of a driver.
And they would not have had, we don't have the mid intersection, we don't have that safety zone at the intersection, right? That's only available further south?
So the crosswalk markings would be present where the trail crosses
Right.
further south. And we really avoid putting pavement markings across multi-lane locations. It's actually been shown to have a 4-fold higher crash risk for pedestrians than doing nothing at all, even if you control for the number of pedestrians.
Interesting, okay.
Just some areas of reference within the city. Highway 97, north of the high school, is a mid-state highway crossing. Downtown, obviously, is a mid-block crossing with the Hawk system as well, too. So there's 2 real examples on a lot busier roads than what we're talking about here, where the mid-block is been implemented.
And if you look at the intersection, we are putting in a ped ramp on that southeast corner. So if there's someone from the community on the west side that likes and enjoys walking down 19th like they do today, and they don't want to walk on the trail, we are providing that refuge on the east side. It's not going to be the designated route for the pedestrian, but we are providing that refuge area. So, is there any other questions or concerns? No. Okay, so we'll continue north. So that brings us to the intersection. So we are proposing to leave it a 2-way stop controlled with 19th being a stop sign controlled, and Everton being a through condition, but we are providing turn lanes. So there will be left turn lanes and right turn lanes added on Everton. And so as we move north, let me turn the page. You can see that the green area on the west side, as you turn the page, it goes away. And that's just because with the apartment complex that got built a few years ago, there's a pond that's located there. And then there's also some large overhead power poles through here. So we have to sneak this trail in to avoid impacts and to make sure we're not impacting that pond, and then reducing the impacts of that power pole. So as we're coming up, you can see the future driveway to that proposed apartment complex that I believe is slated to get built this summer, summer 2022. So we've been working with that developer, making sure that their grading and matches what we're designing, and working with them, and they've been great to work with. So to fit in that right turn lane into that new apartment complex, we have reduced that green space by 5 feet through that turn lane. But then as we move north, we go back out to a 10-foot grass area between the curb and the trail. So with this design, we're reducing impacts on the east side. So you can see that we're not impacting really the ditch area very much on the east side. So we've been working hard at moving water through here. It is very wet, and so that was one of our objectives, is to see where's the water going, how is it getting treated. So we're able to fit that in with this design. So is there any questions on this page 3?
Just confirming you've had conversations with those property owners on the east side and input. Any items of note that are maybe conflict points that aren't addressed that we should be aware of, or?
Not that we've identified yet. The one that we were unsure of is the commercial property on that northeast corner. So we met with them. We were worried because they have that loading dock off of Everton right there. So we were asking, how is construction going to impact your deliveries? What kind of coordination do you need from us? And they actually have a second loading dock off of 19th, and they said they just need about a 2-week notice so they can redo. So one of them's receiving, one of them's export, so they'll just move it all to that other one. So that's pretty great. Also, there's a lot, there's also 19th services these businesses too, so they do have alternate access during construction. So it's really, we did let them know that we were gonna need to coordinate with deliveries, and working up to it, but that's closer to construction.
That was one thing that we discussed during the project management meetings, that all property owners were contacted to discuss any issues or concerns, and Washington County has addressed all those questions.
Yep. We had a specific meeting with Custom Mold, because I know they're looking to expand and what they're gonna do with that parcel that they purchased, where that residence was. So they've been great to work with. They don't, I believe they purchased property off of Everton somewhere else in the city, and they're planning on expansion there, but we told them we'd continue to work with them during construction with this site as well. So if no other questions, we'll move to sheet 4. So now we're getting up to, so Menards. So Menards, this is one of our top 3 comments, was this area here with the Menards and then that Broadway West retail on the east side. So we've had multiple meetings with Menards to discuss this. This is a wetland area that we're proposing to put this driveway, so there's going to need to be some coordination. Construction's probably have to start a little earlier because there's some geotechnical work that needs to be done. And then we're proposing a pond in this area. So we're still in negotiations with them. Like I said, we're not in final design yet, so we're pretty high level with this design, so we don't, we're at high level costs. So this is the goal that we're working towards. Menards is in support. They said, yes, they've gotten complaints with this area with their customers, that they see that if this is feasible, if we can construct this, if we can help facilitate that, then they're willing to talk with us and work with us and try and get to this goal. So we don't have anything on paper yet, but they are in support with the project. They are in support with this design, and we're just working through the process still. So any questions on that?
It looks like the turn into kind of that retail area is right across from the turn into Menards there.
Correct.
Boy, that's a much better solution than it currently is.
Yep. Yeah, we always want to consolidate what's called conflict points, and if you put those two together, you're consolidating, so it makes it for it's more manageable. So
This alignment here actually improves 3 intersections. You got the Broadway intersection, which is gonna alleviate a lot of issues there. Lining up the intersection like you're able to here now is gonna help drivers as well, but plus the one that's internal into Menards. Right now you shoot off through the parking lot and you come in at an angle of both directions have stop signs and everyone's looking at everybody what to do. Now coming in like the way the road should be, it's going to be a lot easier just internally on their parking lot as well.
Yeah, it'll be much more intuitive of where to go. And yeah, thanks, Ryan. And we're also planning to increase the capacity of that left turn onto Broadway. So it's still, I mean, we're making it as long as we can, which will help, because that's, I think, looking at the traffic analysis, that's one, the biggest concern is that length. Cars stack up there, and then they can't get out of Menards, and then they stack up into Menards.
Right.
So making that longer will help with capacity out there. Any other questions? So we are putting in the pedestrian facility on Broadway as well, so we're gonna cross on Everton here, so there will be push buttons. We are doing updates to that signal. And then the last page we have is then bringing the trail over to 19th to that signal. We did go with the alternative that puts the trail right behind the curb. The alternative that reduces the impacts to the business, the hotel, and the quick oil change there that are currently there today. That reduces their impact from the project with accommodating the pedestrians through here. So this last page is it actually, it shows you where it connects to the bridge down on where we started. So when we built that bridge in 2013, we made it wide enough so there's a trail on the north side. So we're just going to connect in with that. And then this winter, we're actually going to be starting the 11th Street project, or County Road 32, which will then pick up on the other side of the bridge and continue that trail to Highway 61.
Did you say the trail is on the north side of Broadway?
No, I'm down on 11th. So,
oh, you're down on 11th.
Yep.
Okay.
But correct, we're going to connect on the south side of the bridge on Broadway. Yep.
Okay.
So I do have a layout, and everyone's welcome to come up and take a peek at that. It's easier maybe to see if it's in one whole versus seeing it chopped up in your handout.
Any questions before we take a little field trip over to the table and look at the layout? I'd welcome an opportunity to see the whole thing kind of laid out, and so I guess I'd invite council to join me if you want to take a look. Comfort level of this curve is, do not eliminate into yeah.
So as you're in a car, you want to make sure that the car stops many times not prior to the pedestrian. So we did look at that, and it makes it, yep. So it's hard to tell. So right now, there's a lot of overgrowth out here. So it's a lot narrower. So when we come here, we're going to be taking off a lot of that. After years, I want to be a lot better.
I just drove that tonight. Obviously, what's going around there feels tighter than what this would be. A little less water. And have the trails and the green space even more wood on the backside of this instead. Roll around vegetation out there.
Yeah, and the last time we went on a walk, there was a good to see it today.
I know.
See, visualize.
Yeah, you just can't.
That was
It's
a
like
challenge.
a mix of
So,
rock and
yes.
oil and stuff.
Yep.
And
Because I've driven it many times and thought, but I trust with the new design of this issue. So, I might do yeah, so that's my grading series. This line right here is what we're grading. We're going to grade all the way out here. So we're going to all the vegetation. Right. And also right there coming out of what was the trails on this side that are going to shoot at that time to get down to 11 and then 80 on the other side. Yep. And
I'd say number one, I love the trail. That's huge every time we come down here. Stuff like that.
So they're actually gonna put in a trail here, and we checked with that grade to make sure that we can connect that with the trail. We actually had to modify that grade to make sure that it's not just, right, they have to modify that to make sure it was. There is some engineering we have to do with this trail to make sure that it doesn't.
So thank you for providing the large scale picture. It's always helpful to see the whole thing together and drawn up. Next steps would be a resolution of support. And as part of that resolution of support, are you anticipating asking for our support for this design? Is that included?
Yep, so I can send examples of resolution of supports, but yes, so this is just a check before we move into final design. So you're supporting the process we've gone through, and you're supporting the proposed design that we've come up with through that process.
I did have one more question. You talked about the city's piece of that being 370,000, but then there were some costs that were not included. Do we have a sense of what that will be?
It's a crystal ball. So
Ballpark?
yeah. So that's really the construction. So what's gonna happen now is we identified what our footprint is, what our impacts are gonna be to the surrounding landowners, and then we'll hire on an assessor, and they'll go out and assess the property and come up with a cost. And then our right-of-way specialist will get in a negotiation with the landowner. So if that's temporary easement or permanent easement or full acquisition, it depends on what the impact is and what the need is. But all those costs are gonna be negotiated out with the landowner, and then we'll have a better cost for right away. I know, Ryan, I believe the city wanted some improvements to the utilities out here. Is that still true?
Mayor, City Council, just to answer that a little more in depth. So this cost, this local share that the county's identifying, most likely is gonna be all state aid eligible, and that's when I keep referring to you with these cooperative agreement projects that we have in 24, 26 with the county, and 24, 25 with MnDOT's. That's why our state aid funds are unavailable until 2027, 28. I'll tell you exactly what I budgeted for when the county leaves, because they're gonna be well below that, right? We have televised the sanitary sewer. We don't have any major issues out there. We got some gate valve stuff we want to fix along with the project and some castings here and there, but overall, that's gonna come, those costs would come out of our sewer and water, and we budgeted those separately as well, because those are your user rate enterprise funds. And the county and MnDOT's state aid, sewer and water works not eligible. So that's why that's budgeted separately, but I think we're in line with what we budgeted on the construction side, what you've seen tonight. And obviously the next thing, if we can get through pretty easily, is the right-of-way stuff. That's sometimes the issue on projects. So we need to do tonight to go to the next step, so.
One of my remaining questions, you had mentioned a maintenance agreement, and I'll ask the question because it's been a while since we've done this. Do we have a maintenance agreement today with Broadway Avenue? And I guess how generally have those terms changed over the years? And just kind of, if you could just kind of give council an overview of kind of what's generally included in those maintenance agreements.
Yeah, so with that, it's gonna be, so the county will plow the road and maintain the road, but then the trail, if you want it plowed in the winter time, it would be a city maintenance. Mowing, the city or the county mows approximately twice a year, depending on how visual sight lines become a nuisance or not, then we might do a third. But if you want it more manicured, that would be a city cost. So you would go out and mow it more. So it's those type of things that we work out. Lighting, signal, the signal at Broadway is a county on county, so there is no joint cost, but on 19th, it is a shared signal. So there is a cost agreement, I believe, existing. If not, then we'll do it through this process. If it is existing, we'll just go off of what the agreement says that's existing. So those type of things.
And we have a similar agreement with Broadway, right? With the maintenance of the trail and plowing. Right?
Correct. And then a separate signal agreement. So if there's any modifications that change or what's identified in the signal agreement, we might have to bring back the signal agreement and modify that. So like say we add some push button stuff. Just don't have that memorized off the top of my head and what's all within those, but that's just another agreement we have with the county.
And then Dave planned for maintenance on those boulevard areas. Do we have other boulevard areas with County Road that have similar, where we have to consider, do we want more than 2 times a year? And do you have some thoughts on that? I know this is a very early preliminary question.
We do some mowing up at the 11th Avenue Bridge as well as, well, this is the state, but we mow the medians for 61 all the way through town, and that's basically the same thing. They'll come in twice a year and mow, but we are aesthetically pleasing. We mow it weekly or every few days, so, or every 10 days. So I'm assuming we'll mow this boulevard to keep it like normal turf and plow our, just like our snow removal policy is all trails, and in the city we plow. So I would assume we just add this on to our list.
Okay.
Yep.
Other questions that council may have, project team? Anything else you want us to know at this time?
No, I believe we're scheduled to come back next week to
Perfect.
seek the resolution of support.
Perfect.
Right.
Ryan, Dave, anything else we should consider? Excellent, good. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. We will move on to a follow-up to our budget discussion, and Patrick, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, just a quick couple of things. Gave you an update on your desk. You can put up as normal. When we submit the budget to you, there's always some unknown information out there, state aids and things like that. So we traditionally try to go back and make sure that we've caught everything as far as the revenue goes.
we go.
Anyway, so we do traditionally go back and look in and things like revenues. In this particular year, we also went back and looked through a number of different expenditures, particularly in the community development when we have been talking about community development. So I will go through these quickly and give you the impact of those. If we have questions, they may be able to wait till after Bruce is done from his, if you have questions, I want to get Bruce up here in a minute. But the two revenue adjustments, we had new numbers on the police state aid and the fire pension state aid, and that added $72,000 to our revenue stream. Those are pretty straightforward. Some of the expenditure adjustments, we had some part-time wages in the administration budget, which we don't know why it was ever there. So we actually found it this year, so we're taking that out. We're adding almost $30,000 to community development wages, as you recall, or may not. When we proposed the budget, we had a community development coordinator in that role and budgeted accordingly. Since that time, we have shifted to the community development director's position and split that between EDA and the general fund. So that's the impact of that change. You had to add almost just about $30,000 in salaries. In the building department, that $45,000 reduction is, we used to contract, or we still contract with MinSpec when we need to. However, we're fully staffed at 3 building inspectors right now, so we don't anticipate that we would need that for the next year. If we do get that busy or something, revenues should cover that if we ever have to go back to MinSpec.
You still have access to those services, you're just not planned and. So,
right.
Okay.
Right. Again, we have 3 inspectors now. We only had 2 for a while, so I think we're okay there. We've eliminated the position, the communications and recreation position. That would save us almost $61,000. With the communications duties being shifted around and continuing to shift around and reanalyze that, and we're still working on that. However, we wanted to make sure that recreation had some additional wages to more or less just do the peak periods next summer. So April, May to August, September. I think that's necessary to keep Jamie sane and still employed here. But we also do need that. It's getting very busy on that side of the equation. So if you look at that, what that does to the levy, we started out with an $8,850,000 levy. We've added $72,000 in revenue, and we subtracted another $74,900 in expenses. So that brings our new levy to 8.703 that we're going to propose. And that's not including any of the needs, what do they call that? When they subtract. Never mind, I'll tell you later. I forget. Anyway, so what that does is we originally had on August 30th, we proposed a $12.5 million levy, and which equated to a 9.4% increase in the levy. This takes it down to a 12.38 levy, and we're 8.18%. So we think these are all good adjustments. We will continue to look. We do have some more work to do on this, and that, part of that is what Bruce will be saying in a few minutes. Before I introduce Bruce, what tonight's goal here is Bruce is going to go over possible bonding for roads in a minute here. We are going to propose a $10 million bond. $10 million bond is for roads and for equipment certificates. So pretty much $8 million for roads and $2 million for equipment. Why are we stopping at 10 million? Because that's bank qualified. That's where we get the best interest rates. One of the $8 million it's going over 4 years. So that should give us a good amount of money for 4 years. What that will also enable us to do is slot that into the financial plan and then be able to project after that. So we'd like to stabilize 4 years of where we're going, and then we can now firmly go forward for the next 4, 5, 10 years, or whatever that may be at least. So we need some decisions on those. The other thing is that the bond for roads, if passed, that is only roads for maintenance. That's only repair roads. That's just, very resurfacing kind of work. It does not include major reconstruction of roads. We have some major reconstructions of roads that we need to talk about. Let's just take Forest Lake Road. You've all talked about North Shore Trail, which is not in bad shape, but it's perceived to be dangerous. Those are major construction streets. We have not allocated money or know how to allocate money. Well, we know how, but we haven't identified money how to do that. Our current policy would say, if we wanted to do Forest Lake Road, for example, that we would special assess 80% of that road reconstruction to the homeowners on that street, and the city would pick up 20%. Same thing on North Shore Trail, and I believe there's maybe 3 other major roads to go through that we have to do that. So that's not included in this. If the council wishes to have us give you a number of what some of those major reconstructions roads, and you want to re-talk about if the policy is still a valid one, we should do that and start that now. The fortunate thing is that this bond is slated for 2022. It won't affect the 2022 levy. So we have a little bit of time, but we really need to talk about the maintenance side of this, the maintenance roads, and then the major reconstruction roads and which way you want to go for there. So if we talk about this next year and the council decides, well, we want to do Forest Lake Road and it's going to cost us an extra $3 million, do you want to add that to the bond? And we hope to present that to you, but that's the kind of discussion we need to look at now. And Bruce will kind of talk about that. So I think that's all. If you have questions, I'll take them now, but if they can wait, and Bruce. So I'll introduce Bruce from Ellers. He's our financial advisor, and he'll go through some interesting facts. And
Patrick, could I tee up maybe just a couple of questions that we can circle back on after Bruce's presentation? While maybe Bruce is talking, could you, from the updated levy impact, could somebody run what the tax rate impact is for that? That would be helpful to have.
I'm sure we can get that.
And then, as it relates specifically to this question around our assessment policy and consideration of our assessment policy for these major reconstructions, I could use just some background information on, specifically for Forest Road. I think I know a little bit more on North Shore Trail, but could also use some information there on why do we, what's the tipping point where we consider a reconstruction to be necessary rather than maintenance? And I know I can project some of those answers, but I feel like I don't have a strong answer specifically for Forest Road. And in particular for Forest Road, one of my questions would be, is it possible to just classify it, just do maintenance and not do a full reconstruct? And I'm sure there's some pros to cons to that. So just some initial questions that come to mind that we can slate after Bruce's presentation here. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Bruce Kimmel with Ellers. First of all, when Patrick was talking about the levy, it's going to be reduced by about 1.5 million due to your fiscal disparities distribution to the city. So if your total levy is 12.4 million, your actual net levy that you'll be spreading across all the city taxpayers will be about $10.9 million as a result of that 1.5 of fiscal disparities. So it's still important to figure out what your total levy requirement is, the 12.4 that Patrick outlined, but the actual amount that you'll be filing with Washington County for putting on the taxpayers will be about 10.9 unless there's further changes to the budget. And I'm guessing Sandy will be confirming this as she works in real time, but I was running your numbers as well, and I think whereas this year's tax rate is about 40.6%, with the reductions of about $150,000 that Patrick outlined, you should be about or less than a percentage point higher. So you should be around 41.6 or thereabouts. And subject to further revision, but it's really, testament to the tax base increases you've seen and the prudent fiscal management that you're only looking at maybe a percentage point increase in the tax rate. Okay, so I just wanted to give a brief overview of capital financing. So if you recall, I was here back in March when it was starting to get warm, and now it's getting cold. And we reviewed the city's 10-year financial management plan, or we call FMP. You'll recall that that includes a projection of operating revenues and expenses across all of your major funds. It includes your capital improvement plans, your estimated tax base growth for not only the next year, but for the next 10 years, and then existing and future debt. And then other cool things like as TIF districts fall off and you regain that tax base, we factor that in as well. Also, back in March, we introduced this idea of bonding for perhaps up to $10 million to help fund a big chunk of future road projects, maybe like Patrick indicated, 4 years at $2 million a piece roughly, plus roughly $2 million of equipment replacements. And then the idea is that you would use up some of that freed up levy capacity, certainly in your equipment replacement account, but perhaps also in your paving account to fund some park and trail capital projects that I know you've slated not only for this next year, but years following as well. So this month, working with Patrick and Sandy, we updated the FMP with your preliminary fiscal 22 budget. As you know, or you may recall, the anticipated tax levy is a little bit higher for both general fund and other funds for good reasons, because you're making significant investments on some deferred items. But that would cause, the tax impact to maybe go up from what we had indicated in March. But then on the flip side, you've got a much larger amount of growth in your tax base than what we had conservatively budgeted. You have a larger distribution from fiscal disparities, that 1.5 million that I referenced earlier. And we're using lower bond rates in the model because we're now actually looking at potentially doing a bond issue this coming, let's say, spring. And so it's not so much just conjecture. And when we're looking far out, we want to use a high bond rate to be conservative. Now we can actually dial it in and get more realistic to today's market. So all in all, the net result is that you have a lower expected tax impact for fiscal 22 than what we presented to you in March. And we're really confident in the city's ability to feather in this new debt service on a $10 million bond issue starting in fiscal 23 and thereafter. You're in really good shape. Of course, it's still a policy decision. It's your decision on whether and how to proceed. But from a financial capacity perspective, things are looking really positive. So then I want to spend a little bit of time on the capital financing plan, digging a little bit deeper. As Patrick mentioned, we're looking at potentially bonding for $10 million this coming spring. I want to note that while we try to optimize your use and ability to use that bank qualified status to get the lowest overall interest rates, it should never be a sacred, we can never ever exceed $10 million, right? The city has exceeded that before for this building, for instance. And right now, actually, the spread or the difference between BQ and non-BQ rates is relatively low by historical norms. That has to do with the current tax code and other factors, but it's always nice to have, and if we can always keep you within 10 million or less per year of bonding, that's great. But I never want you to feel like you're jammed up or not being able to really have your optimal financing plan just because of that somewhat arbitrary number. Congress is, by the way, talking about maybe increasing that limit to 30 million a year, which would be amazing, but it's Congress, and so we're not really counting on it because who knows if and when that will ever happen. So the elements of the bonding would be 8 million for street improvements, again, roughly $2 million of additional capacity per year. You'll recall that you typically budget for about $1.2 million of state and federal aid and about $800,000 of franchise fees. So you're essentially doubling your capacity for road repairs over the near term. And of course, you might decide to do more in a given year, depending on what Ryan and Dave can feel comfortable with, or less. So it's not, it doesn't have to be exactly $2 million additional per year, but it's a significant increase in your capacity to improve and maintain and extend the life of your existing road infrastructure. $2 million of equipment replacement, funds would really be used up over the next 2 years. You have some fire engine replacements, some other major vehicles and equipment that would be slated to be funded with this portion of the bond proceeds. I should note that you're not locked in. You can also use these bond proceeds for other purposes. I know you're looking at some new replacement squad cars for the police department. I just talked briefly about that with Patrick and Sandy today, but it's possible that you could say, hey, given our other options for financing those squads, we actually want to fold that into this bond issue and maybe reduce one of the other components. So more to come, but we definitely are wanting to cover the waterfront in terms of how you might leverage this bonding ability to really benefit the city. And then one thing I really want to note is that even though this will be one bond issue, each purpose within this bond issue, whether it's 2 or 3 or however many, can have its own structure and amortization schedule and repayment sources as well. So we could, in theory, throw in a water or a sewer portion of this. Right now, we're looking at bonding for elements that would be repaid with levy, streets, and equipment, but it doesn't need to be that way, and each element can have its own repayment term as well. So, for instance, if you did add in police vehicles, it would probably be, less than the 15 or 9 years that I show on the slide here. So you really have a lot of flexibility in how you approach this financing. Okay, sorry for all the text on this slide, but I just wanted to reiterate, why are we proposing this? It's really to be able to spread out the cost of some of these chunkier investments that the city is looking at making, and really crucially, be able to shift some of that levy capacity to parks. Because in Minnesota state law, you have lots of abilities to finance streets and sewer and water infrastructure and equipment, but not so many options to finance parks and trails. So our idea is to help give you the capacity to shift some of your levy authority that you're putting into next year's budget. You can do that at any point next year and use that for Park and Trails project. Now, with the caveat that your exact levy reallocations will really depend on what those park and trail projects look like in terms of cost, their readiness, how shovel ready are they, and how you actually decide to use those bond proceeds relative to the needs for streets and equipment. So there's a few moving pieces, but that's the big idea, right, is to free up levy capacity to fund new parks projects. I mentioned the first part of the rationale, and I really think that this sort of hybrid cash and debt funding approach will really give you an optimal ability to advance both your street projects, your equipment projects, and your parks projects without either having to spike your levy or really deplete your reserves. Okay, great. It turned out the right way. When I was looking at this on my phone, the chart was flipped like backwards. I was like, that's not going to work. So this is the fun part. You have I was about to say AAA. You have the next best thing to a AAA rating, which is a AA plus rating with S&P. You'll for sure have that affirmed with flying colors. I mean, the city is doing great, and I talk with S&P every week, and so I'm fully confident that you'll be affirmed at that level. And because of the market and also your credit rating, your interest rate, your all-in interest rate on the street portion in today's market would be under 1.5% for 15 years. That's fixed, right, with no rate resets. And your rate on the equipment portion would be less than 1%. So it's really, you can see, we keep on thinking about inflation and economic recovery, and at some point rates will have to go up, but you can see that they plummeted during the pandemic, and actually they've just sort of been blipping around at near historic lows even over the last year or so. Okay, so if you authorize us to keep moving and working on this project, we would anticipate that by early next year, we would like to have a good handle on which projects and which cost levels we want to fund with the bonds. Are we staying with 10 million, or is there a compelling reason to go higher than that? For instance, if you want to tackle some of those street actual reconstruction projects, as Patrick mentioned, again, I would not say let's sacrifice those just to stay under 10 million. But then from there, we would move on to a spring issuance process. And for some of you who haven't been through this bond process before, I just want to lay out some of the key steps. Really, the bond issuance itself is about 2 months, but when you factor in some of the preliminary planning from start to finish, I would say it's probably about a 2.5 to 3 month process. And so if we started in February, for instance, with urgency, we could have proceeds by May easily. And hopefully that would line up well with what your department heads and your engineer are looking for. And of course, that can slide either earlier or later. So that's all I have for you. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the FMP update or the financing strategy or how you sort of marry these different capital priorities to a funding plan using cash and debt. But we're excited to be back here, and you definitely, from a financial perspective and a bond market perspective, all the lights are green. You just get to make the policy decisions on whether and how to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Council, questions? Questions for Bruce?
I don't think I have any for Bruce at this point.
I have a, just a, I'm not sure if this is a Bruce question or a staff question. Can you, someone go into a little bit more detail when we're contemplating using a bond facility for equipment? That's, I think you said that's a 9-year cycle. Are we cycling equipment through that 9 years? I mean, given an individual piece of equipment that we may buy, some may have a 9-year life, but if we're talking squad cars, I think we replace, I hope we're replacing squad cars much sooner than that.
What we're talking about there is when we talk about the 9-year and the equipment we're talking about fire trucks and plow trucks,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
are 20 to 30-year life.
Okay.
Right,
And if we would do squad cars, if that makes sense, we would only put those on a 3-year schedule. There's no reason to go any further than 3 years. That's the normal turnover on squad cars anyways.
Okay, so we're going to individual amortize that portion based on the equipment that it was used to purchase.
Right, exactly. And we've just assumed 9 years at this point because effectively state law limits you to 10 years or less for repayment of any type of equipment, even equipment that's going to last 20, 30, 40 years.
Yep.
But when you actually look at the dates and timing cycles, usually that 10 years becomes 9 years just because you can't time it perfectly to be exactly 10 years.
Understood.
So that's why we're assuming 9 years at this point.
And then if we were to, let's take a snowplow example, our snowplow replacement is every, how many years? Longer than 9, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, a bad example, let's use a
15.
fire truck.
Fire trucks are what, 25?
20.
20?
20 years.
20 years.
Difference between what we have done versus what we should do, right?
Yeah.
But, so it should be 20 years. And so are we doing that within a 9-year cycle, or are we using a couple of different facilities to piece that together?
Are we doing?
If we're going to use a 9-year instrument on a 20-year piece of equipment, are we stringing a couple of issuances together, or are we paying that off within 9 years?
You're paying it off within
Paying off
9
within
years.
9 years. Okay.
So you basically have it free and
Yes.
clear for the next 11 years in
Understood.
that example.
Okay.
Yep.
And that'll help smooth out the capital equipment replacement fund so that we don't have to spike it all the
Correct.
time. And that's,
Right.
I mean, that's a major challenge is when the fire trucks come 3 in 3 years at 700,000 a piece, that's a tough thing to take. So it makes a lot of sense to do equipment certificates only because you stretch that out, but also the interest rates are, right now, if they're below 1%, there's no reason not to.
Okay. And that is still a purchase. We're not into some sort of a lease facility.
Correct, it's a flat-out
Okay,
purchase.
it is a purchase. Thank
There
you.
are options to lease, but what we've contemplated here is an actual purchase. So you own it free and clear with no mortgages or leases or anything like that.
Yeah, just for a point of information, we are also exploring leasing squad cars. We meet with the state has a program that may be able to do, we just have to look at the numbers and things like that, but we meet with them on Monday to see if that's an alternative for us as well.
Understood.
And just a quick question on your screen is the new tax rate that we've calculated. It's 4.33. That's just why I threw that up there real quick, not to get off track here, but that's what it would be.
Can we get a copy of your presentation, Bruce?
Of course.
Okay,
Yep.
that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot of good information in there I'd like to have. I think the rest of my questions are probably for staff. I mean, I just really want to map out what, what the proposal would be for the $8 million. And then, I'd like to take a look at major reconstruction, the roads that are we feel are subject or needing major reconstruction. what is the financial impact of that? And then taking a look at both scenarios, the 10 million and then the addition of the major reconstruction, what would be the impact to taxpayers going one way or the other?
Yep, we can do that. I think it's important for us to have that discussion regarding the major reconstruction streets policy and things like that. We can lay that out pretty well, I think.
I just don't think we can kick some of these down the road any longer. So I just really want to take a look at this big picture.
I agree with Councilmember Byström, and to support the conversation around potentially changing our policy on assessment for major reconstruction, it would be helpful to just know from a historical perspective, last time we did that, and even in well, maybe we have to go, I think Ryan's gonna tell me it's a goose egg. In last 20 years, we've done that. I think that historical perspective is important.
So I won't go on a very long story to get to where we should go, talking about the history of how we got to the current assessment policy, but it basically involved a pretty big road committee group, and franchise fees did not exist prior to that. Upon going through that process and adopting the new assessment policy, we went from assessing property owners 70%, city paid 30%. Now the assessment policy in a full reconstruction project is you assess 20%, the city pays 80%. If it's a residential road, for example, North Shore, you would equate it back to the city's standard residential road, which is 34 feet back to back, which is like a development road. 15th Street Southwest was the last road that the city did. They tried to do this project in 2009. Imagine the 70-30. We went to a 20-80. So swallowing the cost on the property owners was way different. And obviously the road was just as bad as Eureka is right now. So, but that was equated back to a standard commercial roadway. So obviously 15th Street was oversized a little bit to accommodate the designated left turn lane. That was the last 429 process the city went for. Typically you need at least a minimum of 6 months. That project you needed more because of the costs that were involved in the public meetings that we wanted to have with every single property owner on that project. But you gotta go through the process. If you miss one of the steps in the process, then somebody can appeal their assessment and you have other issues to deal with. Also on assessment projects, if you're not increasing, say, the value of the property, the said amount you're assessing, that's where it becomes difficult too. So would we like to reconstruct every road? Yeah, Public Works, and I would love to do that. We can't. We don't have the money to do that. It's not feasible unless we know we have major utility problems. That's when we come in to do the reconstructs. 15th Street was, I don't even know how stuff was flowing through the road. I don't know how they kept their water on out there, kind of like North Shore. Dave and Public Works are out there continuously with water main breaks. Sewer has some capacity issues up that area, so that would be an easy no-brainer. You need to do a reconstruct, and obviously nothing meets ADA compliance out there. You know, roadway is fairly decent shape compared to the other roads we have in the community, but it's all the other stuff that's underground that people don't see. Forest Road, we could probably get by with some maintenance, but there's some major drainage issues in that first park. I can't remember the name of the park, so that would require us to bring storm sewer up to deal with that area, because that's the only way to deal with it is to take drainage south. Putting curb and gutter along Forest Road would impose some additional very expensive permitting issues with the watershed district. As soon as we introduce the curb and gutter, then all of a sudden the whole stormwater treatment and property acquisition out there. What we do have to the benefit of us is we don't own the sanitary sewer line down Forest Road. That's owned by the Met Council. But there are some sections along Forest Road in this area that don't have water main that you would like to make those connections. You could do some of that on this section pretty easy because of the rural character by just directionally drilling between A and B. But we also have no idea what MnDOT's ultimately going to do at the south end and what the county's going to do at the north end. We know access is going to dramatically change in the south end with the Highway 97 project. So how far does that then meander up into Forest Road? Right. Ideally, on the north end of Forest Road, we would love to do what they're doing with the Menards and Everton Avenue, right? You would like to line that intersection up with 4th, and the school traffic then now has a 4-way intersection, and potentially you could have a signal or something else to help alleviate some of the traffic issues there. Otherwise, you come off of 61 now and you go Centennial, Forest, 4th, and with a vertical and horizontal curve, and they got the sun in your eyes depending on which way you're going in the morning. So you got all the things you don't want to deal with at that intersection. So that's kind of just been one of the road public works has focused on, just patching. As you can see, we did a lot of patching out there this last year. But then there's some of those other roads that are out there that obviously have major safety issues and traffic issues. 12th Avenue. Nobody really wants to talk about that or deal with it from Broadway down through Target and all the way down to the county road. You know, we know what that's going to take. That's alone from that distance from 2 county roads, 7 to 8 million right there, you know, if we do it right. And there's been concepts drafted and drawn, and we've talked about this all the time at road meetings too. So those are some of the other things. And then there's Harrow Avenue, right? Yeah, we would all love to see intersection control at Harrow Avenue and Highway 97. We've tried to meet the warrants of intersection control, you know, to MnDOT to get the counts out there, even knowing when they put the tubes out there to send other people out there to drive the routes more often than normal, trying to get them up, but we just can't meet the warrants throughout the number of hours that are required for a potential roundabout or a signalized intersection. That potentially is going to come pretty easily with some of the development that we're talking about or having the queue. But until that actually happens, that's one of those, it's hanging out there. Someday it's going to obviously need a major upgrade just because you got a 2-lane road, no shoulders, and you see people walking out there all the time. And that area is continuing to grow. So that just kind of comes back to a lot of the type of work that we're doing now is more preventive maintenance or maintenance driven, just because all those other things we're talking about and some of the areas, you know, along North Shore, we don't own all the property yet. So we have to go through each parcel. Some of it would individually would have to pull owners encumbrance reports to see what may be recorded or not, because a lot of that still, you know, has the county stuff that went through there in the old days, and it didn't actually have platted right away because there was no subdivisions around it. It was just individual houses being built one after another. But I could hand you the 2020 road rating maps. Right now, I did highlight on there what the projects were of this last year. So those obviously be now rated 9 to 10. It's not very favorable looking at it even in the 2020, the 2021, that the field work's been done, but the map hasn't been updated. It's going to show a lot more roads that have fallen down into the 3s and 4s than what you have on this map. That just means there's going to be more red and orange on the map versus what we want to see is, I mean, even yellow's decent, but we'd like to see more blues and greens. So we do this annually. So it's a visual for elected officials that don't want to get in the details of, you know, a bunch of roads. You can look at a picture and see kind of overall what your city looks like. We can easily highlight and give you what miles is in this category and miles in that category to give you a perspective where we're at. So it's just the needs are out there. Bruce mentioned that we're budgeting 1.7, but all your state aid money is accounted for, right? That's going to these cooperative agreement projects, but there's a lot of value in those projects too. We're going to improve the transportation, the safety, the pedestrian access, which kind of what you all hear about in all these surveys that we do. And just upon this Washington County project that we talked about earlier tonight, how it's going to loop your pedestrian facilities. Now you'll be looped down to you can go all the way to downtown, you know, for that development that's out there in the west end of town. Will literally be able to take a trail all the way to downtown now, 2 ways when it's all the projects that we're talking about are completed. So that's the great thing about those projects. Obviously, you can see the price tag that the county's paying versus us paying. So a local share, the pie we're talking about, I think, you know, it is what it is. It just so happens to be a lot of them coming down the pipeline. And after the city did the improvements at Goodview in 97, we let it, therefore, you know, you still have the cost share policies, but somebody's got to, you know, pay for some of the other stuff that goes on with the projects. But I think it was a successful project too. We've laid out a number of plans based on what money's allocated. The 2 million added to the existing budget fits staff well, right? So every time you do have these 3 projects, you're constantly having Gopher State 1 calls. This is some of those little things of projects people don't really realize. Every time a Gopher State 1 call is in, Public Works has to go out there and paint mark all that stuff, and they got to keep that stuff up to date, and they're constantly tickets are being pulled and called to deal with this. So all of a sudden we did 10 million in 1 year and went all over the place in the city, well, his staff isn't gonna be able to deal with that. And if we got too big on our street projects, maybe there's one project here and there we have to get big. Then we know exactly who we're gonna deal with. Probably got, just guessing, 5 contractors, maybe we'll look at it because of the size. Otherwise, in the range that we're talking about, we feel like we can attract the smaller contractor to the bigger contractor because each of these projects require performance and payment bonds, and they got to get that qualified through their lenders and all that other stuff on the backside of things that people don't really realize that costs them money. But if they put all their eggs into one basket in one project and that project goes bad for that contractor, well, then that's not a good situation for anyone, right? Because then they're taking shortcuts and then other issues come with the projects. Or they're leaving that project sit and chasing other work to go get better profit, right? So that's why it's a nice range of dollars that we're trying to deal with annually, so we can track both, but then they can pick up multiple projects and deal with that accordingly, you know, so when one thing goes well, or if maybe we have a private utility issue and we need to stall for a week or two. Fifth Avenue Southwest, when we're having contaminated soils, we're shut down for a week until we could get the stuff tested. You know, but then the contractor had somewhere else to go, right? But if it was all in, then, well, the more they're goofing around with you, they're gonna want to nickel and dime you too, right? To make back that revenue. So it's just a dollar amount that fits very well with what we're trying to achieve. We laid it out several ways and how we can then touch the roads. But ultimately, at the end of the day, once we know what that value is, we can more focus on what areas we're gonna do, when we're gonna do them, then we can put a plan together and publicly talk about that with the property owners and the taxpayers. I often will bring this kind of stuff to Rotary. We've done it at the Chamber. We'll talk about it at the Economic Development Authority, Planning Commission. So it's just easier to talk about because we can easily tell people where we're going, what we're doing, and this is what we're gonna accomplish with this money in this time frame. If we don't know any of that, we can sit and do estimates all day at the desk. Obviously, we have things laid out how it would fit best, we think, on the roads and lined with other projects, but there might be a project or two you guys want us to look more in depth at, but that's kind of how we are looking at this, and what's the best thing for the city, how can we have the best access to our construction sites with all the other projects going on in the area, and who can actually perform the work.
If I could just make a couple points to Councilmember Bystrom's point about, you know, being interested in some of those major projects and also piggybacking off of what Ryan was talking about. I wanted to note that it sounds like it may take a couple of years to get your ducks in a row, especially if there is a special assessment portion of one of these major reconstructs. So, you know, this isn't your only bite at the apple, right? We could do this financing here in 2022 to sort of put the wheels in motion for 4 years, as Ryan was mentioning. Sounds like he feels pretty good about that kind of volume flow. But we can also, because the world can change and your priorities can change from year to year, in putting together the street reconstruction plan, which would be required as part of the legal authorization for that part of the bonding, we can include any number of prospective projects, not only the road maintenance projects that Ryan and Dave are thinking about for the next 4 years, but you could, as part of the list, not to say you'd be committing to this, but you could say as one of the authorized projects, you could include one or more of these reconstruction projects too, sort of, you know, in that area where there's dragons on the map, right? You don't know exactly how you're gonna do it, but you can always put it on as an eligible use of the bond proceeds. That's totally doable. Or you could just say, we're gonna figure it out by 2024 or whatever is the appropriate time. The other thing I just wanted to note is I work with a lot of cities on super expensive road reconstruction projects, and it's usually not just one source of revenues to repay, it's usually 5 or 6. So it might be assessments for 10 or 15 or 20%. It can be levy for a certain amount, it can be franchise fees for a certain amount, it can be water and sewer, and there's a lot of latitude under state law to use water and sewer revenues, even for a project that might seem from the surface to be mostly a road project. And so a lot more to come on that, but you know, Ryan has to deal with all of the technical details and the logistical problems and headaches. I'm just here to tell you that if some of these more complicated projects do rise to the top of your priority list, From a financial perspective, there's a whole bunch of ways we can get it done. So for what it's worth.
To that point, this is a small detail, but I think someone had mentioned that our franchise fees, our rate gets renewed at some time in the near future. And just a question on when does that option become available to us? And is there any sense on how much elasticity there is with potential increases to that franchise fee?
And we'll have to look at the exact date. It's either 23 or 33, I think, as I was told. So we'll have to confirm that.
Okay. Might be a far distant. Okay.
Well, but every tool matters,
We're
right?
gonna need every tool.
You need every tool.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll sit, but I'll be happy to come up if there's more questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So, Ryan, back to your comments. In your, if you were put funding aside, which I know is almost an impossible task, but just from a project cadence and prioritization, do you think that there is a scenario where Forest Road and North Shore Trail should be tackled within the next 5 years? Or do you think that these are best sequenced, core 5 years of maintenance projects and then sequence Forest Road, North Shore Trail? And those two get named, but major reconstruction projects.
So I think there's a lot more important maintenance out there right now than there is reconstruction projects. But obviously, I think whatever is decided upon Eureka, that needs to be dealt with the soonest. Drove that again tonight. Forest Road, I think we patched enough to get some thickness out there. We've done some overlays in the past on it. But ultimately, until we know what the county and the state are doing, we got a fair good idea what the state's doing on the south side. But as you just heard tonight, the county, what they meant in their intent on 11th Avenue or County State Highway 32 is they're going to start soliciting RFPs for proposals for engineering services. I've already worked with them on some grant applications, trying to get some trail work funded in that area. Obviously, we were years ahead of the funding, but fine, we lose, and as we get closer, we'll keep trying again. But I ideally know what we would like to do on the north end. Is it something we can achieve with existing property owners, or the cost of that? I don't know yet until we get close to that project and start working through that stuff.
Understood.
I think 12 streets is your number one priority. I've often just for fun sat in the
Forest Road or over North Shore Trail?
Yeah, I just think the safety improvements from Broadway through that Target corridor are the highest, and that's an area we know we've had a fatality. I would just go sit in the Walmart parking lot and have lunch someday and watch what goes on there on a continuous basis. Can't you imagine you're in Forest Lake in that little stretch of corridor, what's going on there? I can share with some of the concepts that we developed, just so you can start thinking kind of along the lines of what Public Works and Engineering have thought about in that area before. North Shore, I think it's the lack of pedestrian improvements that would be great around the lake. I think the road is generally decent. You could do a mill and overlay and get a lot of life out of it, but that's not going to deal with the utilities that are underneath it. And then you're on the cutoff of the water. Do you want to extend water to pick up a neighborhood or two? You know, that's a whole nother conversation to have. But we have so many internal roads that are just crumbling. And at some point, Public Works is going to have to say, I can't put another scoop of blacktop on Forest Road. We have to go deal with this other stuff. We've been have had very good bids the last few years, so we've been able to extend roads to existing projects as we bidded that out. It's sometime that's going to flip, but with bituminous roadways coming in, I know locally that wasn't supported, but from a financial standpoint, that's really been favorable to us because now we have them competing with Knife River up out of North Branch, but then The Tiller mine gets bought out by even a bigger company than Tiller, and now they came and bought the market out last year. So it'll be very interesting to see what we're gonna get between those three entities. I mean, there are three separate suppliers, all competing for the same projects. That's, not every community has all that, so. That's why, you know, we just need to do stuff now with the money being cheap. We've laid out all the stuff where we could go. We've, you know, have the road rating maps here, and some of these areas will, you know, when we come by, we touch the pedestrian facilities too. So if it's pedestrian ramps that are in ADA compliance, we deal with those on those projects. Fenway Avenue is obviously taking a pretty big beating. At an area where if we came in early enough, maybe we can just get by with the mill and overlay and extend that as construction continues to drive down Fenway Avenue, but then also construct a trail on the east side of Fenway Avenue and have that linked down through the Fenway Athletic Parks, and then have that ready for the MnDOT project to connect to. And then now you got another huge loop in the community that if we just move forward on a little stretch of project like that, that would involve 100% of a road and a new trail. And with a new trail, you could use park dedication fees, or you could use, it's a state aid road, so this is state aid qualifying if you had state aid funds, or some of your money that we're talking about here to make that project work. But and the other benefit too that we've talked about, just so I'll reiterate, is when we know where we're going, that gives Public Works time to televise all the stuff that we're gonna deal with underground, which helps narrow the risk of the project or identify things that need to be corrected. And or when things are kind of slow on a day, we just hop over to those future areas of projects and start looking at the storm sewer and stuff like that too. So then that way, going into budgeting season, the estimates are more accurate and the risk of the projects are taken out.
When would you, Patrick, when would you recommend we revisit the concept of assessments? When do we need to, chicken and egg, right?
Yep.
Projects versus assessments. Do we need to revisit the assessment policy and recommit to that policy, or to make a policy change, to change that policy before we start talking about individual projects?
No, I think you need to consider that when you get a better idea what those major projects are going to be. I mean, we'll have obviously some priority list if it's 12th or whatever the case may be. And we should then look and see the cost of that, and then what's the council's appetite for continuing the assessment policy or changing the assessment policy, knowing that those big projects will come. Yeah, we don't need a decision tonight. We probably don't need a decision, next month, but we need to get this pretty soon, December, January at the latest, so that we can set the bonds up, get them sold. Obviously, we're not going to sell a bond in time to get those roads paved next year. It's the planning, it's the commitment of the funds gives us an opportunity to do the engineering, the drawings, the planning, and all of that, and the televising, as was mentioned. So I think we have to. It's all a package in my mind that you have to look at the assessment policy and what you want to do as far as the bonds go.
Agree. I guess I would encourage us to look at the assessment policy broader, knowing that we have a number of these types of projects coming up. I wouldn't want us to be so myopic on assessing policy based on an individual project.
Right, no.
Because it's going to have to apply to the next project that walks
yes.
in the door.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case.
To that point, do we differentiate whether it's primarily commercial or primarily residential in that assessment policy? Because I think that question is different for a 12th Street type project, which is very commercial district, versus Brian, go ahead.
Historically, what the city has done, the biggest difference between commercial, industrial, and residential would be assessed per lot, buildable lot. Commercial, industrial, front footage. So let's just say you go down 12th, right? You can see who would have the bigger front footage. That's how 15th Street Southwest was done to front footage. So the project ultimately develops a cost per foot. You divide it by, 2 on both sides and multiply times the front foot.
In terms of feedback for 10-year plan and kind of pulling this all together, I personally find it helpful to do some sort of a with and without 10-year plan of 10-year plan, changing the assessment policy, 10-year plan, not changing the assessment policy, and then just a number of scenarios of, okay, assume we do the 5-year $10 million bond for maintenance, a number of different scenarios, then sequencing at the appropriate time some of the major reconstruction projects. I could really benefit from just seeing the overall financial washout of some of those different considerations. 'Cause I think it's going to help us to really digest down what's really the big driving factor. And I think right now we've got a whole laundry list of concerns and maybe aren't focused on what's really going to be the biggest impact.
So, so I understand what you've asked for. You want a cost of what we think the reconstruction projects are versus what is our traditional maintenance projects that are going on right now?
No, I think we want that. So traditional maintenance projects, assuming that we've included the 10-year, the additional or $10 million bond to support those, an infusion for those maintenance projects.
8 million.
8 million, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
10 million total issuance, but 8 million for projects. And then a number of scenarios for some of the major reconstructions. And I know it's challenging to estimate what the city's portion of that would be, but I think we need to have some best guess.
So if you want the 10-year look, you want it without a bond at all?
No, assume a bond. I think what I'm
Okay,
looking
so
for
we're
with it
assuming
without.
an $10 million bond for argument's sake.
Right.
And then slotting in what the alternatives are for either expanding that 10 million to do more maintenance roads or expanding that 10 millions to do major reconstruction roads.
Yes.
And slot it in either all at once? Do we slot it in every other 2 years? Do we slot it in at the end of the 5 years? Something like that, at least anyways. We have to talk about how that would look.
Some sort of project sequence that's going to make sense given staff capacity.
So basically a roadway project analysis or plan for the next 10 years with two or three different types of options, and then how that affects the financial plan.
Yes, and if the assessment policy is a major contributor to that, some, discussion around, here's the impact of changing the assessment policy, or here's the potential impact of assessment policy as is.
So what I'm hearing from my perspective with the plan is for us to make some assumptions on big reconstruction projects. And we're looking at it, scenario A is assessing 20%. And I would suggest scenario B be assessing 0.
Right.
To get the full impact,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And then we can make some other assumptions as to what portion would come from utility revenues. Obviously, we need to collaborate with engineering on that. I can tell you that from my perspective, if there's a will, there's a way. Even with 0% assessments, you're a big enough city now that you can get it done. I think for you as the elected officials, it's a question of equity, fairness. If other people have had assessments in the past, does it make sense to get rid of it? Now, on the other hand, Ryan pointed out the benefit test. That's a huge deal. We would have to make sure that within the assumptions that we were using, that it would even pass the smell test on, you could get to a place of saying, yes, we could assess 20% because we think an assessor would reasonably find an increase in value. So there's lots of things that we would have to just make assumptions on and spell out for you. But I've done this exact type of analysis before, assuming X million dollars with or without assessments and see what the tax impacts are.
And because I'm still struggling with we keep saying 10-year plan, but we all know 10 years is probably more like 20, right? Is there a way that this fits, or do we need to, consider some maintenance, extended maintenance rather than reconstruct, or just how, as we're responding to any sort of plan outside of, kind of the $8 million for project maintenance, just gathering council, background information. I'm looking for background information to support council coming to consensus on prioritization. And I think seeing cost estimates, North Shore Trail versus Forest Road versus 12th, even knowing that they're, wild estimates with wild, assumptions built in, I think would help us to at least wrap our arms around impact on some of these decisions. Because ultimately, we are going to have to be comfortable saying, Forest Road is slotted for the next 5 years, or it's not, and here's why. And similar with North Shore Trail, because that question comes up all the time as in the community. I don't hear 12th Avenue as much, but I also appreciate Ryan's perspective that it is important, and agree that that's also part of the consideration.
So Mayor, one last thing I'll just note from my perspective as your financial advisor is I think one thing we can help you do is come up with, what Ryan said at the outset of his comments was really striking, is that there's so many different potential major projects, right? And they all have challenges and opportunities, and it's going to take a lot of time to work through that and figure out logistically which ones can you reasonably do at the same time that you're doing other road maintenance projects, right? And we can't figure that out here, but I think one thing we can do through this exercise is help you get to maybe a point of saying, as a governing body, through these sets of assumptions and leveraging these financial tools, we feel comfortable with a budget of X million dollars for major road reconstruction projects over the next 10 years. And then from there, your city staff can then come up with a set of priorities. But unless you have some ballpark sense of what you think is financially feasible, you're just gonna be spinning your wheels, right?
Yes.
So I think we can help give you some financial guardrails, and then obviously the real hard work is on the engineering side in terms of figuring out what's even practical and highest priority and so on. But I think I'm getting the sense of what you're looking for.
Council, chime in, other considerations you would add to that, or other?
I think we're getting there. I like to see the big picture and then kind of pull back a little bit, or make some decisions about that prioritization. So I think we know it's all needed. It's at what point in time does the work actually get done? So
Agree. I would also just chime in to say, I think that $8 million for road maintenance, and the additional $2 million for equipment is something that we should consider. If we wait to take any action until all of these pieces are known, we won't get there. And also, we're working off of some mighty big estimates, and so if we can move on the near-term things that are more quantifiable, I'd like to see us continue to make some progress. But also appreciate wanting some level of visibility to the big picture.
Yeah.
We don't quite, I feel like we haven't quite gotten there yet.
I'll just bring up one more point too. So like when you're working through an assessment project, we'll show you, what that reconstruct cost is going to be of the total project cost, right? But even though that you're assessing, say, the 20%, it's not like the city's going to get this 20% back now. You're still getting money from 15th. Typically, we assess and give them 10 years to repay it back, certified to their taxes. Every once in a while, somebody can cut a check and don't want it certified to their taxes, so you get some of the money up front, but generally the bulk of the money is paid out over the time that you guys set up that payback rates that's certified to their taxes.
And that's why you bond, right? And you repay a portion of the bonds with those assessment paybacks. Yeah.
We haven't talked about this question, and Bruce has mentioned a couple of times the option of using sewer and water funds for these types of projects. there was a time when our sewer and water funds were not in good shape, and that was not necessarily an option I felt like was on the table. Are we considering that? Is that an option that's on the table, or is?
Yeah, in my opinion, or at least, if you have to do major sewer and water replacement within the street itself, that then allows you to do the rest of the road. I think that's what, I mean, if you're doing no water and sewer underneath, I would caution using water and sewer funds for that.
Okay.
But if we have to do major mains on water and major mains on sewer collection, that's when you can justify doing the whole road with water and sewer funds.
And legal counsel would definitely back up what Patrick just said. It's a balancing act, right? You don't want to spike your utility rates, but you also don't want to spike your property tax rates. So that's where this FMP that you've started to build will become so helpful as you contemplate some of these big, expensive projects, because it'll help you test certain assumptions and say, okay, what are the technical realities of this project? And can we really tap utility revenues for a certain project? And maybe there's another big project that you really can't tap utility revenues for. So you can get a sense for the dynamics there. Yep.
I don't have anything further.
So
Patrick.
just, it's my understanding that we will move forward with the $10 million bond to start to work on that immediately, but then also do the second part of that, which may take a little bit longer, but we want both of those to come forward to the council sometime as soon as possible we can.
Parallel path?
Yes.
Are we comfortable with the parallel path? Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here tonight.
you.
It's very helpful. And Ryan, thank you for all of your detail this evening. Much appreciated. Just one quick wrap-up question. I made the note during Bruce's presentation, larger distribution from fiscal disparities. What's headline, what's causing that? What's, and sorry, I know you were.
No, that's
walking
quite all right.
out.
Mayor and
didn't know
Council,
if
I'm
this was
laughing
your-
because nobody understands fiscal disparities.
Oh, well,
And
I'm in good
it's a
company
it's a
then.
black box in terms of, you can figure out how much you're paying in because it's a percentage of your increase in your commercial industrial tax base since 1972, which is pretty random, but at least you can figure that out. But figuring out what you actually get from fiscal disparities, I was being a little glib, but it changes from year to year, and it really depends on your factors that are part of the fiscal disparities formula and how they relate to the same factors in surrounding communities. And those go up and down and all around every year. And so, you usually have a pretty good sense of where you're going to land, but I don't think any of us were expecting it to go up. I think it's 150 or 200,000. Yeah, but it's like 100, the increase from this year is like 150 or 200,000. And I don't think any of us were expecting that big of an increase in your distribution. So you'll take it, it's great, but can you bank on it for the future? Not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't trend year to year?
No, unfortunately not.
We
It
can be on
can-
the positive side or the negative side?
Right.
Okay.
And it doesn't swing wildly, but trying to pin it down is a fool's errand.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
And that is my last question, I promise.
Okay.
All right. Patrick, anything else you need
No.
council to consider this evening?
We have a clear path, I think.
Okay, that is good. That being the end of our agenda, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. A motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? And we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.